You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network. For more quality options programs, visit www.theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app, available in iTunes and on Google Play. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options. Facebook.com/TheOptionsInsider or via questions at TheOptionsInsider.com.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Gary, for a fantastic discussion. I'm not sure why Gary was so worried about mentioning the penny pilot. If you look at your agenda, we have at least 3 dedicated penny pilot panels coming up over the next couple of days. That was a joke. Thank you very much. Wow. I'm going to introduce the next panel covering the current congressional agenda and the overall impact of the political environment on financial services. Leading the panel is Jim Hall, Director of Government Relations at the OCC. Jim is a political veteran with over 17 years of experience in Washington, including 15 on Capitol Hill. He has extensive experience working on legislative issues in front of the House Financial Services Committee, including the Jobs Act, which was signed into law in 2012. Jim, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you very much. Welcome to this beautiful resort. Welcome to the Washington Outlook panel. Over the next 45 minutes, we're going to have a discussion on the political forecast in Washington, specifically Capitol Hill, and what the potential impacts are to the options industry. So, without further ado, let me introduce our panelists. We have Deanna Dow. Ms. Dow is partner and general counsel at Capital Counsel, LLC. She's one of the most recognized experts on energy and financial services issues. Prior to joining Capital Counsel, Ms. Dow served as Senior Vice President with Ogilvy Government Relations, specializing in futures and derivatives markets. Prior to her time at Ogilvy, Ms. Dow served as Managing Director for Government Affairs at the CME Group and was Senior Vice President at the New York Mercantile Exchange. Ms. Dow began her legal career at the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, where she served as counsel to Chairman William Rayner during the Clinton administration and special advisor to Chairman James Newsom under the Bush administration. Our next panelist is Andrew Shore. Mr. Shore is founding partner of Jochum, Shore & Trossevin. Mr. Shore was one of the senior advisors to the House Republican leadership in the early 2000s. He has also helped launch an automobile company, owned an internet startup called Hillzoo.com, and launched a publishing company in college. Mr. Shore has been very busy. Mr. Shore is a Kansas Jayhawk and a graduate of George Mason University School of Law. And our last panelist is Mr. Jeff Strunk. Mr. Strunk is partner at Forbes-Tate Partners in Washington, D.C. Mr. Strunk has the privilege of representing the U.S. Securities Markets Coalition, which consists of OCC and the options exchanges, which advocate on issues of common interest in Washington, D.C. Mr. Strunk has spent 8 years on Capitol Hill, including 6 with the House Republican leadership, most recently serving as Deputy Floor Director to former House Speaker John Boehner. Mr. Strunk has been extremely active in the Republican Party, both in Ohio and at the national level. Mr. Strunk is a graduate of Xavier University, where he received his bachelor's degree in political science. Please join me in welcoming our panelists today. Before I get to questions about specific issues, I think our audience might like a quick synopsis of the current environment in Washington right now. Since Speaker Boehner has retired and the House has new leadership under Paul Ryan from Wisconsin as the new Speaker, a lot has changed on Capitol Hill in the last year. Andrew, maybe we can start with you. Can you give us an initial assessment of the political environment in Congress this year? What are your thoughts?
Sure. So things have changed slightly, but also history tends to repeat itself. I think it's important that when people look at the environment on Capitol Hill, they understand it against the backdrop of the electoral environment. Starting in 1995, when Republicans took control of the Congress after 50 years of Democratic rule, It's sort of Congress became a jump ball, right? And so in any given year now, any party thinks that they can take control. And that happened in 2007 where the Democrats took back control. So that electoral environment sort of breeds the tension that exists in making law, passing legislation. That's not to say Congress isn't doing anything, and I think Paul Ryan is very much in the vein of John Boehner, statesman, not a rabble-rouser, and he's able to motivate members to get things done. Senate, you have a similar problem. You have 22 Republicans up for re-election this year, but in 2 years you're going to have 23 Democrats, I think. So this, in an environment where anybody thinks they can take control every 2 years, there's not a lot of incentive to really get along and get things done, but there are nuggets that happen. Congress just the House passed a big email privacy bill a couple weeks ago. So little things get done, but it's challenging. Great.
Jeff, you care to comment?
Yeah, just one thing to add, because of swinging the elections, I think that you have also a learning curve for a lot of these guys. If you look at the House Republican Conference alone, there's over 140 new members in the last 3 cycles. So a complete turnover of the conference. So I think that it takes some time for some of these guys to realize how the system works, that the government is not set up for things to happen quickly. I think that's why you see some retirements that are coming up, because members get frustrated with the slow pace of how the Congress operates. But for people like us in the industry, I think it's also an opportunity for us to get in and educate these members on their way in about the issues that are affecting the options industry.
Deanna, do you have any comments?
I think this is probably the most partisan I've ever seen Washington as long as I've been in this line of work. And as you can see, when things are getting through Congress, they typically are on a party line vote, which, it makes it difficult that they're not working with each other across the aisle. But, that's kind of emblematic of what we've seen over the last 8 years, which is another reason why a lot of things aren't getting done. I think the focus right now should also be on what's happening at the regulatory agencies, because there is a lot getting done there. And I see an agenda that's very aggressive because they know that their time is short. With this administration going out, there's going to be changeover in the heads of these agencies, and they have specific things that they want to get done before they're out of there. So I would suggest keeping a close eye on what's happening, at the SEC, the CFTC, all of the, federal regulatory agencies that will have an impact on your businesses.
Great. Well, thank you very much. That was a good brief synopsis. I'd like to turn to an issue that's been on the top of the minds of a lot of folks in the options industry, as well as with the U.S. Securities Market Coalition in this past year, and that is the Department of Labor fiduciary rule. Mr. Luparello and Mr. Katz were talking about that in the previous panel. As most of the folks in the audience know, the Department of Labor published its conflict of interest proposed rule, better known as the DOL fiduciary rule, back in April of last year. The proposal would cause broker-dealers to become fiduciaries with regard to their ERISA and IRA customers. Most importantly, for the options industry, the proposal had the effect of eliminating the ability of customers to use options in IRA accounts. So the options industry sprang into action. The U.S. Securities Markets Coalition worked together to reach out to the Department of Labor and to members of Congress on Capitol Hill to let them know of our concerns with the rule. Outreach efforts made by CBOE, ISE, and the other exchanges were critical to the coalition's arguments to include options in the final rule. In addition, Mr. Gary Katz, President and CEO of ISE, testified on behalf of the coalition at a DOL hearing on the rule back in August of 2015. All these efforts together were successful, and we are pleased to report that under the final rule that was published by the Department of Labor, investors will be able to continue to use listed options as part of their IRA and 401k accounts. While there are concerns the rule will have a potentially negative impact on product education, overall we think this is a really big win for the industry. Andrew, I'd like to start with you. As most know, the House passed a bill under the Congressional Review Act last month to overturn the DOL rule. How is the DOL rule viewed by Republicans and Democrats in Congress? And what are the next steps regarding this bill and the likelihood that it could get through the Senate?
I'll step in for Andrew and take this one because the coalition was so involved in how we went about doing this. I think in general, Republicans are kind of looking at this as, in some ways, political football, and in trying to put Senate Democrats kind of in a box on the issue. So what you saw is that by passing the resolution of disapproval, it only requires 51 votes in the Senate, as opposed to 60 votes on a normal bill. So it forces these, supposedly 14 Democrats that had voiced concerns, puts them in a box and makes them vote one way or another. I think the timing on that vote is fluid right now. And eventually the effort will fail and, the rule will stand as is, and there'll be something more for, the legal system to figure out down the road. But, in general, I think that the coalition went about doing is we try to use the Hill to, as Deanna mentioned, a lot are happening with the regulators. And sometimes the best way to influence the regulators is to get members of Congress involved and exercised. And the coalition was able to lead a letter from the House of Representatives, bipartisan, as well as Senate Democrats that went to the DOL or to the Department of Labor, basically outlining our concerns with the potential rule, and it was successful. And DOL was very responsive to our concerns, and I think that as far as industries go across Washington, I think that we fared much better than others. And it was a very, very successful effort led by the coalition.
Let's turn to tax reform for a moment. We hear every day there are ongoing discussions in Washington regarding the possibility of tax reform. It's no secret that the options industry that we're concerned about the implications of the mark-to-market derivatives proposal that was included in former House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Dave Camp's financial products draft. However, since that draft came out in 2013, that was 3 years ago. Chairman Camp has retired, and there is a new Congress, a new chairman of the Ways and Means Committee in Mr. Kevin Brady from Texas. A lot of things have changed as a new Congress. Jeff, maybe you could step up and, I guess in light of the spending pressures, what are your thoughts on the possibility that Congress could take that Dave Camp tax proposal and use it either to pay for unrelated legislation or put it in some kind of tax reform proposal?
Sure. It's certainly something that has kept me up at night, and I know many people in this room. Again, the coalition has been very active. Many times the CEOs of the exchanges coming in and meeting one-on-one with members of the House, members of the Senate. When you are in a piece of paper or a document, there's always a chance that they will take that and pull it away to pay for something else, because everything in Washington has to be paid for, offset now. It's something that came about after 2006. So the overall Camp draft for financial products, the overall draft, was depending if you talk about the administration or Congress, anywhere between $16 billion and $18 billion. So Congress very much views this as the overall package, not specifically our specific issue, which we think is a revenue loser because you can't tax something that doesn't occur. So we're worried about getting our piece pulled out. We have not argued to the Congress on the merits of mark-to-market. We just argue that mark-to-market should not be applied to listed options. So there's always a concern. I think that in the near term, I think that probably we're in a good spot, but we're always vigilant. Anytime a bill that comes up that requires an offset, the first thing we're doing is checking in to make sure this is not on the table. But something of this magnitude, I think, is very hard to pay for an unrelated bill. But it's something that we always have to be very vigilant on, and it certainly keeps myself and Jim and others up at night.
There's been a lot of talk in some presidential campaigns, this is a presidential year, regarding financial transaction tax. Specifically, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton have thought about and have mentioned instituting a financial transaction tax. Maybe, Deanna, we could go with you to start. Assuming for a moment that either Senator Sanders or Secretary Clinton were to be in the White House next year, do you think there's an appetite in Congress to pass such a tax?
So, in my opinion, I would say no, but with a caveat. So, over the years, since the early 80s, I have seen proposals for transaction tax in numerous bills. In every presidential budget, there's been a line item in every budget. It comes up all the time. Financial markets is an obvious target for a transaction tax. But the industry converges on D.C. like a well-trained army with very sharp talking points, and they kill it before it ever sees the light of day. I've seen it time and time again. I mean, we have this down to a science, right? So this is what tends to happen. It comes up often. However, in this atmosphere, like Jeff was talking about, where there's this need for pay-fors for everything that happens, they continue to be, continues to be a more at-risk environment for something like that actually, getting farther along in the process. As it stands now, it rarely gets anywhere. Once it's proposed, it dies on the vine. There is the potential that, we'll have to be more vigilant. We'll have to work harder to make sure it doesn't happen. The other thing I'll mention is just last week, the CFTC's chief economist's office put out a study. And in that study, they basically said that, what they looked at was a financial transaction tax that was imposed on the futures markets back in the 20s and 30s. This tax was in place for 20 years. And what they found was that it really had no impact on end users. In fact, what they said was, I find no significant change in open interest and conclude that the use of futures by end users was not materially influenced by the tax. Now, that's problematic coming from the federal regulator, because that's just fuel for the fire for those in Congress who are going to be advocating for a tax. That's exactly what they'll point to, a study that comes from the regulator. So we really do have to be more vigilant and on top of it, but I don't think it will happen.
Andrew, do you have any comments on it?
Sure. So who here wants tax reform, right? Everybody. Come on. Everybody wants, right? Nobody likes the current tax code. And any environment where you're trying to get tax reform requires a certain amount of horse trading among the parties. So if you look at the last bipartisan, the really major bipartisan tax bill in 1997, Republicans got welfare reform, Medicare reform, lower rates. Democrats got increased spending in NIH, increased spending in education. You had a president and you had a Congress who engaged in the back and forth of making trades. I think potential President Clinton or potential President Trump would both very much be in the camp of wanting to get something done and wanting to horse trade. President Sanders, I'm not so sure. He has a much more clear-cut political ideology that doesn't lend itself to that sort of horse trading. But what that all means is that you should be conscientious and be paying attention to everything that goes on, because everything's on the table. If you look at the camp draft, people talk about, is the camp draft alive? Is the camp draft dead? Guess what? People want tax reform. That's what tax reform looks like. It's not pretty, right? It's not unicorns and rainbows. It's ugly, it's messy, and it's going to have things in there that people aren't going to like. Does it have a financial transactions tax? Probably not. But does it have other things that you may not want to see? Most likely. So you have to be really dialed into this and understand that the personalities of two of the three presidential candidates, in my opinion, are going to drive tax reform pretty hard in 2017. And I think we're going to see a legitimate effort and a potential law.
Jeff, do you have anything to comment on this?
I completely agree. And I think that they're laying the groundwork now for 2017. House Republicans will put out a blueprint of sorts. They are trying to distance themselves slightly from Chairman Camp's draft. A common theme that you hear is pro-growth, pro-growth, pro-growth. Even though Camp's effort was at a pretty comprehensive effort, I think that the growth that, these economic forecasts is only a 2% growth. I think that Republicans view that whatever tax reform they do has to have something more significant. So right now they are taking a look at the plans of the presidential candidates to see if they can cherry pick from some of those things and put out something that's more of a, bullet points as opposed to a comprehensive bill. But it's something that we all need to lay the groundwork for 2017 when they make a serious effort for this. And Speaker Ryan will definitely push for this.
I don't think Mr. Trump has mentioned this, but does anyone think that Mr. Trump might, if he were elected, that this would be something that would be discussed in Congress?
Tax reform? Yeah. I mean, I think without a doubt. I mean, look, many people have many opinions about Donald Trump these days, but, he spent his life making deals. And I think it's very safe and fair to say that regardless of the rhetoric, he would probably come to Congress very similar to the way in which Bill Clinton did. Maybe not in the same style, but with the same intentions, right? I mean, think about the Clinton presidencies, NAFTA, budget, balanced budget. There was a lot of, and the early Bush years, No Child Left Behind. Not the greatest law, for any of you who have school-age children like I do, standardized testing. There are certain traits that I think these people have had that create an environment to get these things done.
Well, let's talk politics, because that's a fun topic to talk about for this group. Jeff, how do you see the outcome of the presidential election impacting the options industry?
Well, I think that, it obviously depends who the candidate is, but I think that you still have this populist streak with both Trump and with Clinton. I think that Sanders, the longer this primary goes on, he's successfully keeping, Senator Clinton or Secretary of State Clinton moving back to the center. I think you still have this Elizabeth Warren dynamic that isn't going to go away. So I think that, as far as the financial service industry as a whole, I think that we have to, be very vigilant about how we deal with these people. And I think that, and even Trump too. I mean, Trump's talking like saying raise taxes on individuals, and I think that it's very fluid. But I think that this populist streak is not just only for Democrats; it's also going through the Republicans as well. And the financial services industry is, along with airlines, like the favorite boogeyman in the room. So we're always going to be vulnerable moving forward.
Deanna, can you discuss a little bit the environment in the Senate? Although the Republicans took the chamber last cycle, very little seems to be getting done. After the elections in 2016, what is your predictions on who will be a majority in the Senate? And if Democrats take control, who would be their leader?
Okay. So I hope that more gets done in the new Senate than has gotten done in the last 6 years, because it's been a very slow-moving operation over there. I think that it's really hard to predict when you have a new administration coming in and the Senate being a toss-up. I mean, it clearly could go either way with the number of seats that are up on the Republican side, but it's really a toss-up as to which way that will go. So it's a little hard to predict. So the 100 days of a new administration will usually dictate kind of what the agenda is going to be, some of the things that the Senate will start to take up. But if we look at a couple of different scenarios, say Trump wins and the Republicans keep the Senate, my friends on the other side of the aisle, not these guys, but others friends.
We're not your friends.
These are my friends, but they say that they think maybe Trump will want to ram through a tax bill similar to what happened under the Bush administration through the debt reconciliation process, which could be interesting. I think there are a number of things that he also might look to do. Regulatory reforms, for example, undoing a lot of things that have been put in place during the Obama administration, addressing, financial market regulation. You may also see some changes to, some of the environmental regulations that have been adopted. One thing that's coming up that will be particularly noteworthy and interesting to watch will be the debt ceiling, which expires in the end of March 2017. And that always is the occasion for a lot of politicking and posturing. You guys will remember the cliffhangers that were happening in, the Obama administration over that number. So look at another scenario. If Clinton wins, regardless, I think, of whether it's a Democrat or Republican Senate. I think she's going to be a deal maker. I think she appreciates and understands really the powers of the presidencies as well as its limitations. And I think she will work with the Senate and try to force, a legislative agenda that can be pushed through with a majority vote in the House. So I think she will want to have, somewhat of a legacy type of presidency where, particularly in the first year, she's about getting things done that, she can actually point to, certain achievements. But, it's really hard to predict, with it being such a toss-up between, what's going to happen. I mean, I expect the House will probably continue to be controlled by the Republicans, but the Senate's really a toss-up. I think if it does shift, it'll be such a small margin that it's not going to make a whole lot of difference in terms of, how policies are pushed through.
Just to add to that, and it very well could flip back in 18 because you have more Democrats are up and you're off your election. But Dan makes a good point about the debt ceiling, is that Congress basically has been focused on must-pass items. Those are really the triggers of what things to get done. So you have, for example, the spending bills, the omnibus spending bill or continuing resolution to fund the government. You have the debt ceiling. These are where the deals really happen. This is why we have to always lay the groundwork now and make sure that we're educating on a daily basis as opposed to midnight when the deal is getting cut. Because that's not the time to come in, especially on our issues that are so complicated, come in and start explaining the issue then. It's too late. So that's why we do it, day in and day out to make sure that we don't get to that point.
I guess I would just add, look, you've got a lot of members and there's a lot of hard feelings right now in Congress. You have a president who, in the minds of many Republicans, spent 8 years governing with impunity, who came into office and the first thing he did was health care reform. And he called the leadership of the Republican Party into the White House, and they started offering ideas, and he said, elections have consequences, and I won. And that was sort of, in the minds of many Republicans, how that kicked off the 8 years. And feelings just kept getting harder and harder on both sides. And, look, I'm not here. This is not tit for tat. They're grown-ups, and they should figure out a way to get along and get things done. But again, you have to layer over an environment, and you have to remember this, that in any given cycle, either party can potentially take control. And so if you're a politician and you could wake up on Wednesday after the Tuesday election and you could be Speaker instead of Minority Leader, or you can be Senate Majority Leader instead of Senate Minority Leader, what are the motivations that guide you for those 2 years prior? And so I do think that we need that whoever the president is, we almost need like a political timeout. We need an environment where somebody is going to stand up and say, deals can get done. Not everybody's going to get everything they want. You're going to have to eat your spinach, as we all heard as kids, and just have a political timeout and try to wrestle the dragon away and make things a little bit better.
And I do think that if the Democrats take the Senate, I think you ask about the majority leader, I think it'll be Chuck Schumer.
Okay, well, that's good. Great thoughts here. Let's talk about the House. What's going to happen after the election in 2017? Is the House going to change its leadership again? Or do we think that Mr. Ryan will be able to keep his speakership? Or will the House flip and will the Democrats take control?
So it's unlikely that Democrats will take control just because of the electoral map. There just aren't enough districts for the Democrats to win. A lot of historical reasons for that. There are a lot of districts that are what we call minority majority that have packed Democrats into those seats and that have allowed the suburbs and the exurbs to remain Republican. So for the foreseeable future, through the next decennial, about 2020, the House will probably stay Republican. Paul Ryan will be the Speaker. Nobody wants to be Speaker. And the only people who want to be Speaker, nobody else wants them to be Speaker. So, I worked in the Republican leadership like Jeff. I ran one of the offices. I spent about 13 years on the Hill. And every time there was a leadership election, like 3 people would stand up to run. I mean, it is we can say what we will about politicians, but the people who run to lead this country, regardless of their political stripes, they really work hard. And I mean, they're always traveling, and they're always out there in the field. They're always talking to people. And yeah, they're raising money all the time. I mean, that's part of the job. Love it or leave it. So in the end, nobody really wants the job. All that said, Paul Ryan is the right man for the time for this Republican conference. And I mean, Jeff, you may disagree. I see no, short of disaster, I mean, short of them losing the House, which is possible but unlikely, I see no real scenario where Speaker Ryan isn't Speaker come January.
Yeah, I agree. I will say this, though, that I do think Speaker Ryan will remain Speaker. But you're in a situation where House Republicans were going to lose seats no matter what happened. No matter if there was a Republican president, we're still going to lose seats because last election we outkicked our coverage and won the largest Republican majority of 247 seats. So it's just in pure math alone, they're going to lose seats. But now you're in an environment where there's a chance that we lose the White House, we lose the Senate, and now we've lost a certain amount of seats. And you can never really gauge when the members will return from home what kind of mood they're going to be in. And there's a precedent in the past that they can't get the Speaker, they can't get the Majority Leader, so maybe they get someone lower. And that's where the frustrations go out. So I think that the leadership, Speaker Ryan, McCarthy, I think are pretty secure. Scalise maybe as well, but you could see some shuffling at the lower levels. But I guess right now, I think that the leadership team will stay the same.
So if Republicans are going to lose seats, are there any, let's talk about the Senate, are there any vulnerable Republicans that are races to watch for 2016?
Yeah. You have Illinois, Mark Kirk, Pennsylvania, Pat Toomey. Again, a lot of these are predicated on the presidential. North Carolina, Richard Burr. I mean, any seat is potentially in play. We've seen safe senators from both parties lose over the years. They get complacent or they say something stupid. I mean, yes, shockingly, politicians say stupid things. It does happen. But I do think we're going to wake up with a Democratic majority in the Senate in 2017. And then in the next cycle, it'll go back to being Republican. Senator Schumer, I think, is already the de facto leader. I don't think anyone's running against him, so I think that's right. The Democrats in the House have an interesting problem. Republicans in the House have term limits on the leadership positions and on committee chairmen. So there's some valves that allow for growth of younger members to move up. Democrats don't have that. And so you've got a situation where you've got a lot of older members, and I don't mean just age, but in terms of time served, who are really bottling up the younger members, the disruptors. And a day of reckoning, I think, is coming, much in the way that Republicans have kind of gone through a day of reckoning with the Tea Party, but it'll be slightly different, where a lot of these younger, newer members are going to be very frustrated about what's happened and that they don't have opportunities to lead and develop the direction of the party.
Yeah, under Democratic rules, there's no speaker, there's no Paul Ryan, because Paul Ryan jumped like 8 spots to become budget chairman, and that just doesn't happen. And Deanna can talk about it more, but I do think that you have the Democratic leadership they are significantly older than Republican leadership, and it's because of term limits. So you have all these lower members like the Joe Crowleys and the Becerras and the Washburn Schultz of the world that are all looking to move up, and it's stacked against them.
Nowhere to go. Yeah, there is a good deal of frustration within the party over the inability to move up.
How important is it to move up? I mean, we mentioned that some Democrats are frustrated by that. How important is it as a congressman to want to move up? I mean, you hear that a lot.
I mean, how many of you want to move up in your job,
exactly,
right?
Same thing. They want to be in leadership, make the decisions.
Okay. Well, in the presidential election, who do you think is going to win? Do you think it's going to be Trump? Do you think it'll be Clinton? Or do you think it'll be a dark horse candidate that comes out of either convention and runs in the general? Jeff, we'll start with you.
We had this conversation last night, and I'm glad this is on video. But, I personally feel like, first of all, it's going to be either Trump or Hillary. I think that, the brokered convention and for the Republicans has gone away. I don't think it ever really was as viable as people made it out to be, because I think Trump was going to get the votes or so close that it would be a huge mistake to, take it away from him for 50 delegates or something like that. I personally think that that even if Trump tries to move back to the center, I think that he has alienated enough people, women in particular, soccer moms, you always hear that term, the suburbs, that I think that it's going to be really difficult for him to win a general election. I think that both of them, their favorables are very high, I think, which is a frustration for Republicans. You see Hillary, who's a very vulnerable candidate, and we couldn't, get our act together and nominate someone that could beat her. So I think that, he will play in certain parts of the country that, will make those places, competitive that maybe, Senator Cruz would not be able to. But I think in the end, Secretary Clinton becomes the president. I think the thing that we're really watching is how does this affect some of our vulnerable members that are very good and effective legislators, and what can we all do to try to get those guys back here and help them? I think it's something that I know I'm focused on, and helping with our clients try to figure out who the best guys are to help, that we can offset some of the loss of support they'll feel from the presidential level.
There we go. Okay. So how many of you saw that the video of the basketball player during the Final Four? It was, I can't remember the two teams, but it was like Central Tennessee State had beaten in an upset, and they asked the guy a really dumb question about how did they out-rebound you? And he said, oh, well, they went up more times, got above the net, and got more balls, right? It was like just a totally stupid rhetorical question by the press. And not, this is a very brilliant question. That wasn't meant to imply that, Jim. But presidential elections, and I think most elections, aren't as emotional as we make them out to be. I think they're really about math. As long as the Electoral College exists in particular, because we don't directly elect our president. So really it's about lining up a set of states that just give you the right number of electoral votes. If the election were today, if you look at Real Clear Politics yesterday, in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Florida, Trump and Clinton are both within the margin of error of each other. Trump is winning in one state, Hillary's winning in two. I think it's kind of meaningless this early and this far out, but it shows that when you strip away, the emotion, if you just look at the raw numbers, that there is a legitimate opportunity for either Clinton or for Trump to win. Here's the other thing. If you go back into 1988 and you start going forward and looking at the demographics of voter turnout, they have not changed all that much. Non-Hispanic white voter turnout as a percentage of the electorate in 88, I think, was around 80%. Right now it's around 70, last election was around 75%. The youth vote, the percentage of 18 to 29-year-olds has gone from 35 to 40. But actually the percentage of 60-year-olds who vote has gone up, has gone from, I think, 65 to 70. So, when you look at these numbers, it's really hard to say, oh, well, Donald Trump just says stupid things, so he can't possibly win. I'm not seeing it. I think that there is, and look, I was a Marco Rubio guy. I mean, I will support the party's nominee, but I'm not jumping out of my chair to support Donald Trump. But I think the math exists for him to win the presidency. And it won't, it's not an emotional thing. People are very rational about their vote.
So this is recalling our conversation from last night. You have a Clinton and you have a Trump, okay? So these two disagree. Okay?
Sanders?
No. So I would like to think that Hillary can easily win, has a clean shot at getting to the White House, but I don't take anything for granted. I think Andrew is right about the numbers. I think that this is an election that is going to be very difficult for anybody to predict. I do think that, Trump clearly has problems with women, with Hispanics, with African Americans. And so in my view, what's going to be critical is mobilization in this election. So If the voters come out, I think Hillary wins. If the voters stay home and they don't come out to vote, I think Trump wins. I think so. That, to me, is going to be key. Hold on to your seats because this is going to be an interesting ride.
All right. Anybody have anything else on this? If not, we'll open the floor to questions. Does anyone have any questions for these folks? Don't be shy.
We could just talk. I mean, we are in politics. And as lobbyists, we're only slightly more maligned than the financial services industry, so got that.
Since all of you came up with your clear-cut, irrevocable presidential predictions, now turn around and put it in the international context. What do you think the reaction is outside of the U.S. to each of the scenarios that you advocated? Because we're playing on a global stage.
Yeah, I think it's been, pretty clear with Trump. I think you've everything from the former president of Mexico. You've had David Cameron from the UK. I think that he's been mocked overseas. I think that's pretty clear what their view is. With Clinton, I'm sure that it's much more of a she's Secretary of State. They know her. They have relationships with her. I think she's a safe bet in their mind. But yeah, I think that even like was the mayor of London was basically calling him out, saying I can't visit the U.S. now because you're going to not let me in. So I think it's pretty clear where they stand on that.
And even on the level of the general population, having just returned from Italy, it is a constant conversation piece with everybody that you encounter who knows you're American as to what the heck's going on over there. I'm serious. They really are amused and amazed at the fact that Donald Trump could potentially be our president.
Yeah, and I think that, he was asked about his foreign policy and he was asked about Russia. How would he deal with a situation like Ukraine? And his response was, I'd tell him not to do it. Again, I'm sure Putin's like, oh, sure, okay, buddy. And so, that is concerning for me, especially for the Republican Party, who's supposed to be, strong in national security, foreign policy, all that stuff. And this is we're not, I find it concerning.
But there's also some level setting that takes over after you have a new administration. We've had presidents who had very little executive experience who did just fine on the international stage, Tom. And, Trump's going to be a challenge. Clinton, not so much, given her experience. But we deal with Putin. We have to, right? We don't have a choice. So our international partners will find a way to deal with him because they have no choice. Yeah. That's political realism.
One more question. Anybody else? We have time for one more.
Oh, geez.
We don't have that much time.
Not me.
Great question.
I don't know. I think that he said he's gonna pick someone that's a politician and a insider, someone that knows how to navigate the Congress. So you hear all kinds of names thrown out. I think that I don't know what Christie's angling for. I think it's very hard to have two people from the Northeast. I think that Senator Corker's been thrown around in recent days. It's really hard to say. It could be someone out of left field. His whole campaign's been out of left field, so who really knows who it could be? You hear Marsha Blackburn, who's a congresswoman from Tennessee, fairly remote. So I just don't know. It could be something like McCain and picking Sarah Palin, which no one saw on the radar. So I'm guessing there'll be something along those lines. Another question is, some of these guys are, if they're looking at it, who wants to take it, right? There's a reason why, Rubio is so adamant, because Rubio views he's got his eyes on 2020. And some of these guys are looking down the road. Do I want to be part of a, one, do they think he can win? And then two, if I don't think he can, then why do I want to be part of a losing ticket? What does it do for my political future? So there's also that dynamic as well.
I think they're forcing each other to sort of pick their political complement. So Trump, with his anti-crony capitalist sort of bent, forces Clinton to pick an Elizabeth Warren type, maybe not her, but someone of that ilk that could corral the Democratic Party, particularly the far left, to say, no, it's okay, she'll be fine. And I think Clinton, being an institutionalist, forces Trump to pick a governor or a senator or somebody with some experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I really have not heard any names. Ideally, she picks somebody who can bring Ohio, bring Florida, bring PA with them, that somebody that can help her get the votes she needs, because this is going to be a tight race.
Yeah, and the problem with picking a sitting senator is you have to also look at, Dan mentioned Ohio. When you hear Sherrod Brown tossed around, well, Sherrod Brown's up in 18. So if he's not running in 18, someone else with a lower bench, then you're basically conceding that seat to Republicans. So there's also that goes into decisions as well.
Yeah. It's a fun parlor game. It is. But I think most studies show it's not dispositive of an outcome of a presidential election. But it is a neat thing to watch, particularly because, these vice presidents often come from the Senate, or they're much almost closer to the people, right? They don't walk the rarefied air, which is always kind of interesting.
All right. Well, I'm going to cut this short and thank our panelists for appearing here today. They all flew far away from D.C. out here. And I just want to thank you very much. And let's give them a hand.
The preceding program was a production of the Options Insider Radio Network. For more quality options programs, visit www.theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app, available in iTunes and on Google Play. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.